On the night of July 31, 1999, in the small town of Dothan, Alabama, a 17-year-old girl named J.B. Beasley was celebrating her birthday. She had just turned 17 that very day, born July 31, 1982, in Troy, Alabama. Those who knew her described a bright, energetic young woman who loved to dance, who had once been part of the Junior Honor Society and the cheer squad back in junior high. She was the kind of girl whose laughter filled a room. With her that night was her best friend, Tracie Hawlett, also 17, born March 3, 1982. Tracie had grown up without her father, who died when she was only 4 years old, and in his absence she'd grown close to her mother, Carol Roberts, in a bond that would later be tested in ways no parent should ever have to endure. Tracie and JB were inseparable, the kind of friendship built over years at Northview High School, where both girls were seniors. The plan that night was simple: drive to a party in the nearby town of Headland, Alabama, to mark JB's birthday with friends. They climbed into JB's black 1993 Mazda 929, a car that belonged to the Beasley family, and pulled out into the warm summer night. It was supposed to be a celebration. It became, instead, the last night of their lives. Somewhere along the dark country roads connecting Dothan to Headland, the girls got lost. It was a detour that would change everything. Court testimony and investigative records would later reveal that JB and Tracie never made it to the party. Instead, disoriented in the dark on unfamiliar roads, they pulled into the Big Little Store, a Chevron gas station and convenience store at 763 East Broad Street in Ozark, Alabama, a small town about 20 miles from their home in Dothan, and a town neither girl had any particular reason to be in that night. It was there, at that gas station, sometime in the late hours of July 31, stretching into the early morning of August 1, that the girls' paths crossed with someone who would end both of their lives. Prosecutors would later argue that the girls had called Tracie's parents from a payphone at that gas station, asking for permission to stay out later so they could go to another gathering, a party in a nearby field. It was an ordinary teenage request, the kind made on countless summer nights across small-town America. But before they could make it home, a man approached them. According to the state's account, he produced a gun and forced the girls back into JB's Mazda. What happened over the next several hours has never been fully reconstructed, even decades later. What is known is grim and final: both girls were shot in the head. The bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett were placed in the trunk of JB's own car. The morning of Sunday, August 1, 1999 began like any other in the Wiregrass region of southeastern Alabama until it became the day two families learned their daughters were never coming home. The girls had not returned that night, and by morning their families had reported them missing. The case was treated, at first, as a possible runaway situation, not unusual for two teenagers who might have simply lost track of time. That assumption would not survive the day. A black Mazda matching the description of JB's car was spotted parked on Herring Road in Ozark, Alabama. Retired Ozark Police Sergeant Bobby Blankenship would later testify that he was the one who first found the car that morning, around 10:30 a.m., discovering a wallet and a purse inside that confirmed it belonged to J.B. Beasley. Soon after, Alton Miller, a juvenile investigator with the Dothan Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division, arrived at the scene, having been called in that morning about a possible missing persons case. Miller noticed a dark substance on the car's bumper. Searching the vehicle, he eventually found the trunk release lever. He pulled it. Inside the trunk, Miller found the bodies of both girls. They had been shot to death and left there, abandoned on a quiet residential road, just a mile from where a man named Coley Lewis McCraney, though no one yet knew his name, happened to live. The discovery sent a wave of shock and grief through Dothan and Ozark alike. Two 17-year-olds, last seen heading to a birthday celebration, found murdered and hidden in the trunk of the very car they had driven that night. In the days that followed, the Ozark Police Department launched what would become one of the most extensive investigations in the region's history. More than 500 interviews were conducted. Forensic experts tested the DNA of more than 70 potential suspects. A nationwide, 24-hour tip hotline was established. A reward of $15,000 was offered for information leading to an arrest, later supplemented by an additional $10,000 announced by then-Governor Don Siegelman. Autopsies performed by forensic pathologist Dr. Gregory Wonger at the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences Laboratory in Montgomery confirmed both girls died from gunshot wounds to the head. DNA evidence recovered from J.B. Beasley's underwear and clothing led investigators to believe she had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. No comparable DNA evidence was recovered from Tracie's body. Despite the scale of the investigation, leads dried up. One Ozark resident falsely claimed to have witnessed a man take the girls into the woods, hoping to collect the reward, a claim police determined was fabricated. A man from Michigan came forward and allegedly confessed to the killings, but when his DNA was tested against the evidence on Beasley's clothing, it did not match. Years passed. The file did not close, but it grew cold, the kind of cold that swallows whole cases, whole families, whole decades. For Carol Roberts, Tracie's mother, and Cheryl Burgoon, J.B.'s mother, the unanswered questions became a permanent weight. The case haunted the Wiregrass region of Alabama for 2 decades, inspiring local news coverage and, eventually, true crime podcasts dedicated to keeping the girls' names alive in public memory. The break, when it finally came, arrived not from a new witness or a deathbed confession, but from a rapidly evolving field, forensic genetic genealogy. In April 2018, investigators across the country watched as California authorities used a public genealogy database to identify the so-called Golden State Killer, ending a decades-long mystery through DNA alone. The breakthrough rippled outward. In August 2018, the Ozark Police Department, led by Chief Marlos Walker, reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, a forensic genetic genealogy firm based in Reston, Virginia, hoping the same technique might finally crack the Beasley Hawlett case. Parabon's genetic genealogist, Cece Moore, and her team uploaded the crime scene DNA profile to a genealogy platform called GeneMatch. The initial search did not produce a clean match, no third cousins, no obvious candidate. But the team was able to construct a probable family tree, narrowing down a list of surnames connected to the unknown DNA profile. That thread, patient and painstaking, eventually led investigators to a name no one in the original 1999 investigation had ever flagged: Coley Lewis McCraney. McCraney was, on the surface, an unlikely suspect. A 45-year-old truck driver from Dothan with no prior criminal record, he had grown up in Ozark and graduated from Carroll High School in 1992, where he had served as president of the library club and competed as an athlete. He was a military veteran. In 2013, he had founded a nonprofit ministry called Spirit and Truth Lifeline Ministries. By the time investigators came looking for him, he had built a quiet life, married for years to the same woman who had been his girlfriend back in 1999, and respected enough in his community that he had become a preacher. What investigators also discovered was that in 1999, McCraney had lived less than a mile from Herring Road, the exact street where JB's car, and the girls' bodies, had been found. In March 2019, nearly 20 years after the murders, police made their move. McCraney was brought in, questioned at length. His defense attorney would later claim the interrogation stretched on for 27 hours, and that McCraney requested an attorney multiple times before one was provided, an allegation that would shadow the case through trial. A DNA sample was obtained. It matched the genetic profile recovered from J.B. Beasley's body 2 decades earlier. On March 18, 2019, Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall announced the arrest publicly, crediting the Ozark Police Department's persistence and the new science of forensic genealogy with finally identifying a suspect after 20 years of silence. McCraney was charged with 2 counts of capital murder during a kidnapping, 1 count of capital murder during a rape, and 1 count of capital murder of 2 or more people. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. The case did not move quickly through the courts. McCraney's trial did not begin until April 2023, nearly 4 years after his arrest and almost 24 years after the murders themselves. He was represented by defense attorney David Harrison. The state of Alabama was represented by Attorney General Steve Marshall himself. The trial revealed a story far stranger than anyone in 1999 could have imagined. On the witness stand, McCraney testified for the first time that he had, in fact, known J.B. Beasley before the murders, though not by her real name. He told the jury that weeks before her death, he had met a girl who introduced herself as Jennifer at the Wiregrass Commons Mall in Dothan. He had no idea, he claimed, that Jennifer was actually J.B. Beasley. According to McCraney's testimony, the three of them, McCraney, Beasley, and Hawlett, had arranged to meet on the night of July 31st. He said Beasley was late, so he went home. Then later that night his truck's alternator failed at a gas station. It was there, he testified, that he ran into the girls again at a payphone, spoke with them for a few minutes, and accepted a ride to a second filling station where his semi-truck was parked. He claimed that he and Beasley had consensual sex in the cab of his truck, after which the girls drove him home in JB's car at around 12:45 a.m., and that was the last time he said he saw them alive. It was a story that directly contradicted what McCraney had told police back in 2019, when he denied ever having met either girl. That inconsistency became a central point of contention at trial. McCraney told jurors he had lied out of fear, believing the moment police placed him in handcuffs, his fate had already been decided in their minds. The prosecution offered the jury a very different version of events. They argued there had never been any arranged meeting at all, that J.B. and Tracie had simply gotten lost en route to the party in Headland, stopped at the Big Little store, called Tracie's mother to extend their curfew, and were then approached by McCraney, who produced a gun and forced them back into the car. Medical examiner testimony, crime scene photographs, and DNA evidence formed the backbone of the state's case. DNA recovered from Beasley's sweater, sperm fragments found on her underwear, and a vaginal swab that prosecutors argued proved McCraney had raped her. Defense attorney David Harrison pushed back hard on the totality of the evidence, repeating one question throughout his opening and closing arguments to the jury: where was the evidence beyond McCraney's DNA? He argued that genetic material alone, decades old and without corroborating physical evidence tying McCraney to a weapon or to the crime scene itself, was not enough to prove murder. The defense also raised pointed questions about how the crime scene had been handled back in 1999, including the apparent contradiction between Sergeant Bobby Blankenship's account of discovering the car and investigator Alton Miller's testimony about who was present and when. Decades-old procedural gaps, the defense argued, cast doubt on the reliability of evidence collection from the very beginning. On April 26, 2023, after one day of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict: guilty on all 4 counts of capital murder, including the rape charge against J.B. Beasley. For the families who had waited nearly a quarter of a century for an answer, the moment was overwhelming. Carol Roberts, Tracie's mother, had spent 2 decades believing that whoever took her daughter from her would never be found. She had told local reporters in the years before the arrest that the not knowing was its own kind of torment, that she had not slept through a full night in nearly 20 years, that she still heard her daughter's voice in her mind. Cheryl Burgoon, J.B.'s mother, addressed the courtroom directly during sentencing, describing a pain that had never faded, a wound that 24 years of waiting had done nothing to heal. On June 15, 2023, Judge William "Bill" Fillmore formally sentenced McCraney to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Attorney General Steve Marshall, who had personally prosecuted the case, stood before the cameras afterward and told the public that while justice had finally been served, it could never undo what had been lost: 2 teenage girls who would never grow up, never graduate, never live the lives that had been stolen from them on a dark road outside Ozark, Alabama. Not everyone in the courtroom believed justice had been done correctly. A group of McCraney supporters gathered outside the courthouse holding signs reading, "Coley Strong," insisting that the man they knew, a husband, a preacher, a veteran with no criminal history, could not be the person responsible for such violence. It was, and remains, one of the more contested true crime convictions of its era, a case built almost entirely on a single, decisive piece of DNA evidence, recovered from a rape kit collected the very morning the bodies were found, sitting untouched in storage for 20 years until the science finally caught up to it. The murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett are, in many ways, a story about the limits and the eventual power of forensic science. For 20 years, the case sat unsolved despite having usable DNA evidence from the very beginning, a profile that simply had no match anywhere in any criminal database. It took a breakthrough hundreds of miles away, in the unrelated case of a serial killer in California, to set in motion the chain of events that would finally connect that old genetic profile to a name. It is also, more simply, a story about two best friends who set out on an ordinary summer night to celebrate a birthday, who took a wrong turn looking for a party, and who never made it home. Northview High School seniors. Best friends since childhood. Gone in the space of a few hours on a road they likely never meant to be on. Today, the Big Little store at 763 East Broad Street in Ozark no longer exists under that name. The location is now an inland gas station, an ordinary stop for ordinary travelers who have no reason to know what happened nearby on a summer night in 1999. Herring Road remains a quiet residential street. And in Dothan, Alabama, the memory of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett, two girls who never got the chance to become anything more than 17, endures in the families who never stopped fighting for an answer, and finally, after 24 long years, received one.